Yo, what is going on YouTube? I am Germ here. We're back once again. I'm going to be reacting to another clip from this Travis Gafford interview where he did interview Bjergsen. This was just a couple of days ago, like 3 days ago, I believe, on December 21st, where he talks about Bjergsen and talks with him just kind of through his career, walks through everything from the very beginning, the early stages, all the way up until his most recent season, obviously his retirement, becoming a head coach, everything he's thinking about the future. It was a really, really great interview where he asked, really, in my opinion, a lot of the questions that we were all wondering, a lot of the questions that we were all thinking. So if you are interested in getting more news about Bjergsen, TSM, his kind of transition to coaching, anything like that, definitely go check out this interview on Travis's channel. But in this specific video, we're going to be talking about a short clip of him talking about how at one point in his career, he did consider actually leaving TSM and what some of his different options were. But before we get into that, I just want to mention real quick a word from our sponsor today, which is Draft Buff. This is a fantasy esports website and app where you can play in leagues with your friends, with random people that you find on the website, because as you can see here, you can create a league and you can even find a league or quick join a league. If you don't have 6, 8, 10 people, whatever, ready to go to make a league with, to draft with, you can go on there and find one. It's really fast, easy. It's a really, really fluid app and website. They're really awesome. They've been great to work with. And if you're hyped up about the LCS, LEC, LCK, whatever, and you want to play some fantasy sports, this is an awesome way to do it. So make sure you go check out Draft Buff, download the app today, and when you sign up, make sure you use code IAMGERM. I would appreciate it a ton, and so would they. With that being said, here we go. Let's check out this clip real quick, see what Bjergsen's got to say, and I'll kind of be reacting to some of the stuff we talk about real quick.
Yeah, I definitely thought about it, especially, I think it was last year, 2019, that my contract was coming up, and I was entertaining whether I should think about going back to Europe. I wasn't really thinking about any Asian countries because I think that communication is really important, and I would not be the same player or the same leader or teammate if I can't.
So I thought that was pretty interesting starting off because I know at certain points in his career, people have talked about like, yeah, should Bjergsen consider going to like the LCK? Would a Korean team want him? Would he want to go to a Korean team? How would his kind of development as a player and leader how would he go? You know, if he's been so good in the LCS at TSM, who has terrible coaching staff, terrible management, blah, 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 how good would he be in a Korean environment with Korean coaching staff, Korean infrastructure, Korean solo queue, all that stuff, playing against LCK mids every single day? We haven't really heard that stuff much the last couple of years, but I know, I want to say earlier in his career, that was definitely a conversation and debate, and Bjergsen just kind of says that, yeah, he would never really consider going east, and I do think that makes a lot of sense, because again, we haven't really seen a player do that, even though there's definitely been players good enough, because yes, the language barrier and the culture barrier and the culture shock and just everything that happens does make it very, very difficult to go over and do something like that successfully, which makes it even more impressive, honestly, when we see Koreans come over to the United States or to Europe or whatever and be successful. But it is not very surprising to me that we've seen a ton of Koreans and Chinese players and stuff, you know, move over and maybe not look as good in the LCS or in the LEC as they did on some of their other teams, because yes, it is a huge, huge shift. And I'm not surprised to hear Bjergsen say that that wasn't really an option for him, especially being a super, super vocal leader like he is, which is part of the reason why I think he's going to transition to being a head coach so well. But I did think it was interesting that he talked about that.
Speak the language fluently. I've worked speaking through a translator, and it really doesn't get the same point across and the same connection. But at the time, I think Nemesis had just played a year or half a year with Fnatic, so I didn't really see them replacing him with me, especially since I hadn't really been doing that well for the last 2 years.
Now, I do think that's interesting when he talks about when he's saying he was going to potentially consider leaving North America, potentially going home to Europe, returning to the LEC, especially because TSM had been struggling and all that stuff. Fnatic is the first team that he wants to talk about. And yes, Nemesis was coming off a good year, and people seemed pretty hyped up about him, and people were excited for him. But man, I'm sure Fnatic fans, especially seeing how things played out, and how you know, Nemesis ended up not having the best 2020 season, and people are really not excited about him. And then just a year later, he's gone from Fnatic entirely, and now they're getting Niski instead. I mean, the timeline does look pretty crazy, where it sounds like Bjergsen, if Fnatic had offered him the spot, and if Fnatic had been willing to move on from Nemesis and go with a bigger name player like Bjergsen, sounds like he maybe would have potentially considered it, and man, that would have been so, so crazy. I mean, it really would have changed how everything went. If Fnatic had Nemesis in their, they had Bjergsen instead of Nemesis on their team in 2020, Bjergsen was MVP caliber, one of the best mid laners in the LCS, one of the best mid laners in the West this past season, And if that was on Fnatic, where they were just a single game away from making it to the semifinals at Worlds, with Nemesis looking very, very shaky, very inconsistent, very bad at times. I mean, Fnatic with Bjergsen could have potentially made it to the semifinals at Worlds, could have potentially done some damage. That would have been crazy. That would have been exciting to see. And that's super, super weird. And then obviously, you see what happens. Reckless ends up leaving Fnatic, and now Fnatic is all in this weird position where they're have a bunch of moving pieces and stuff. And the future is maybe a little bit of a question mark, and it doesn't look like they're going to be better than G2 anytime soon. But if, man, they could have landed Bjergsen, everything would have changed. But like Bjergsen said, people were pretty high on Nemesis at the time. Bjergsen was maybe coming off a few iffy splits with TSM. He says he didn't look very good. Obviously, he still looked very good. He was still a top 3 mid laner in the LCS, but he wasn't that MVP Bjergsen that we knew from the past or that we ended up seeing in 2020. So I get what he's saying. Also, a part of it was that the TSM roster in general just wasn't very good. But yes, he wasn't making it to international events. He wasn't winning LCS titles. So he was maybe a little bit kind of lower on his radar than he had maybe been historically. But he was still obviously a very good player. And it still would have been crazy to see him go to Fnatic. And I think it's interesting that Fnatic is the first team he brings up. Because yes, G2 is obviously the roster that you'd want to be on. But they had perks. They had caps. That was much more unrealistic. But Fnatic kind of being that TSM of Europe, that huge fan base, that crazy history and all that stuff, it would have been interesting to see this happen. This is crazy that he's talking about this, and I did think it was a big talking point and just really interesting.
Have caps and perks, and if you are to go to LEC, you really should. Those are the teams that you join, right? Fnatic and G2, those are the teams that have consistently won over the last years. I was thinking about looking at opportunities in other teams, but I talked to Reggie about why we had sucked so much in the last 2 years, and we were actually really aligned. We had a lot of the same ideas about what had gone wrong, even though he wasn't really super involved or not.
So Bjergsen just goes on to talk about why he ended up staying at TSM, maybe why he didn't look into those opportunities further, and obviously things ended up working out a little bit on TSM. They ended up getting an LCS title. They ended up making it back to Worlds. Obviously, Worlds didn't go well. Bjergsen ends up retiring, and who knows if he would have went to Fnatic or if he would have went back to Europe, would he still be playing now? Would he have done better at Worlds? I mean, because that's kind of the big stain on his career and his legacy is that he never really had that international success. He only made it out of groups, I believe, one time at Worlds. They got very close a couple of other times. They were very far from it a couple of other times. He has the 0-6 ending to his career. A lot of that stuff, whereas European teams have been much more consistent at Worlds. They've had much better performances. And that Fnatic team that Fnatic has right now and that had at the beginning of 2020 is a very, very talented team and a very good team. And obviously, a lot of people would say that Nemesis was the clear weak point, the clear weakness for the team, especially as the season played out. And again, Bjergsen's coming off one of his best seasons as a professional player. Nemesis coming off of one of his worst. Fnatic needing that mid lane talent, especially that leadership big name. And it could have just changed the outcome and the impact of so many things. I mean, Fnatic with Bjergsen at the helm, Bjergsen and Reckless together teaming up, would have been so exciting, so fun to watch. And maybe a team that even could have competed with G2. Like, yeah, G2's probably still better. G2 probably still wins out. But man, that series gets way more interesting all of a sudden. It gets way more competitive all of a sudden. And then you have two kind of just star-studded teams in Europe that could both potentially go to Worlds and do damage. That would be so exciting, so fun to watch for the LEC, for European fans, and just for the Western League of Legends scene in general as far as performing at international tournaments and stuff. And again, it would have just changed the shape of so many different things. It would have been interesting to see what TSM would have done. Would they still have been able to go get somebody like Power of Evil? Would there have been other mid lane options? Would Cat Evolved would have just been able to rotate into that mid lane position? Would they have got one of these other new and up and coming guys? Would they have had to import someone from Europe like a Nemesis or something like that? There could have been so many potential roster swaps and careers and lives of just so many different people and organizations could have changed because Bjergsen has been so synonymous with TSM since the beginning of his career. And yeah, obviously, like he says, if you're going to go to Europe, you're going to want to play for G2 or Fnatic. Just like so many people have said, when you come to NA, you want to play for TSM. It's that big name brand that can really change your life, change your career. Like some teams don't really have the capacity to do. Like in North America, just this last year, we saw FlyQuest make it to two LCS finals in a row, and still some of their players are not getting the hype and fanfare that some of the other teams have, just because FlyQuest doesn't have that history. They don't have that fan base. Going to FlyQuest and succeeding is not as big or exciting or impactful on your career as going to TSM and succeeding. So Bjergsen knew that, yeah, if I'm going to go to Fnatic, I'm going to go to G2. But yeah, if things would have worked out at different times, if Bjergsen would have been a free agent at a different time, if Nemesis would have had a bad season at a different time, we could have seen things work out so different. I thought that was just really cool to hear him talk about in this interview, and I thought it was a really kind of interesting talking point and discussion point. And if he would have reached out to them, I would wonder, what would Fnatic have said? Would Fnatic have replaced Nemesis with Bjergsen headed into the past season? Because yes, Nemesis was coming off a pretty good year. He looked like he had a bright future ahead of him. But obviously we saw how that all worked out and played out. But that is pretty much it for this video today, guys. Definitely drop a like if you enjoyed it. Leave a comment down below. What do you think about Bjergsen talking about this? Do you think he should have returned to the LEC? Do you think he should have gone to Fnatic? Do you think Fnatic would have wanted him? Do you think Fnatic would have replaced him? Would have replaced Nemesis with him at the time? Or do you think Bjergsen, I know a lot of people are like, oh, Bjergsen just looks good because he's in the LCS. He would never have been as good in the LEC. He would have never been as good, blah, blah, blah. He hasn't done it at international events. There is really people on both sides. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts and opinions. Subscribe to update on all my latest content. Check me over at Twitch, twitch.tv/I_am_germ_. Hopefully I catch you guys in the next one. But until then, peace.